is my great pleasure to introduce our next guests. So we have Maria Magner and Rory Dill, and I am going to let their story unfold by way of them. So that's all you get from me. And so thank you so much for coming, and I will hand you the mic.
Thank you, Winona, and thank all of you for being in the room and all of you on Zoom for letting us share our patient story. So, as Winona said, my name is Maria, and this is my husband. And we'll start with a little bit about me. So, I grew up in Northeast Iowa in a small town near the Mississippi River. It was a farming community, and I had a lot of animals growing up. This is Black Beauty and my goat, Billy. Yeah, really original, right? And my mother was a dietitian for the local hospital, and my father was an electrician. But also, growing up, we ran a small town bar. It was called the Old Oak Pub. And this is a photo from our family Christmas at the pub. And I would walk to the pub after school and play music on the jukebox and listen to the stories told by the bikers or the regulars. I think I developed curiosity, and I, I, I saw in those regulars a common humanity, and I channeled that curiosity into my undergrad at the University of Iowa, where I majored in journalism and where I met my future husband, Rory. Growing up, my family always watched the local news. It was on an NBC affiliate station. So when I graduated from college and I got a job producing the morning news on that channel, I thought, I've made it. I get to report on the news in my hometown. And I soon realized that to produce the morning news, you had to go in at 10 p.m. and write and manage the newsroom. Producers like an editor for a newspaper, and I was all alone, 21 years old, answering the phones. It was a challenge, but I learned a lot, as most people do right out of school. And if you're working third shift, which I expect a lot of people do in this healthcare industry, I've witnessed it firsthand. You encounter a lot of independence and responsibility. I covered natural disasters, tragedies, but I also was witness to resiliency, and I got to interview presidential candidates because Iowa at the time was the first in the nation to caucus. I was nominated for an Emmy, and then my husband got into medical school. So we started our journey. 10 years, 14 years, it's a long time, That journey took us out of Iowa, and we lived in Mesa, Arizona, Portland, Oregon, St. Louis, Missouri, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was in his residency program for pathology in St. Louis, and I got my graduate degree and started working for a biotech company. And my role included coaching scientists to best communicate the research to the other teams, leadership, or the public. And then in 2020, as COVID hit, we were pregnant with our first child. Rory was supposed to start his forensic pathology fellowship in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we were packing up in St. Louis, and we realized that the baby was breech and at risk of other complications. So we had an emergency C-section, and in the span of 5 days, C-section, moving, and we landed in Tulsa, and he started his new fellowship on time because he had, why so little C-section? Yeah. So we survived the pandemic, and a little over a year later, we were expecting our second child. And I remember talking to Rory, and I said, I really wish, or I hope that this pregnancy is uneventful, because the first one during COVID and moving and everything. But we soon realized that I was experiencing my face on the right side was experiencing drooping, and my speech was getting slurred. I also had a deep sense of hopelessness, and I just chalked it up to pregnancy and working full time and having a toddler. But at 6 months pregnant, on Thanksgiving Eve, I had a seizure, and we went to the ER, but still reeling from COVID and understaffed, the holiday. They wouldn't let in Rory or my daughter, so I sat in the ER for 6 hours before I was admitted. And before Rory was able to see me, I was told that I had a brain tumor. We were scared and confused. What will happen to me or to my baby? The next day was a series of tests and consultations. We realized that the options in Oklahoma were either risky or non-existent. Neurosurgeons said that my surgery was important and critical, but the pregnancy complicated things. We soon realized that we would have to wait out the pregnancy until the baby could be safely delivered. But as my symptoms progressed every day, I didn't think I would make it that long. So we reached out to everyone we could. We reached out to people at Mayo Clinic, the University of Iowa, Northwestern, WashU. And as we were weighing our options, and risks, I was contacted by a coworker and friend of mine, Stephen Ward. You might know him by his better half, Winona. And I remember the conversation. I was in a waiting room, and he said, "Can we do anything for you?" And we had always prided ourselves on being self-sufficient. So I said, "No, it's okay. We got this." And then he said, "My wife works with a great doctor called Dan Lowenstein. And as I understand it, Winona talked to Dan, and Dan talked to Dr. Chang. Within 24 hours, we were scheduled for a consult. That, excuse me, this is Stephen Ward and Rory and me in St. Louis after a hard work day, and Stephen and Winona and their family. That conversation with Dr. Chang washed away all the uncertainty we were feeling. He was compassionate, communicative, and reassuring. He had already reached out to maternal fetal medicine and OB. And he said, "If you can come to San Francisco, I will help as best I can." So that consult was on a Friday evening. And we were in San Francisco that Sunday. Dr. Chang had already scheduled the surgery for Wednesday.
In the year and a half prior to Maria's seizure, I was working as a medical examiner for the state of Oklahoma, where I would perform autopsies on people who died of unknown or violent circumstances. But prior to my work as a forensic pathologist, I trained as a general pathologist, and working as a general pathologist in a hospital, I diagnosed hundreds of different cancers, and many of those were cancers of the brain, such as in these images here. And immediately upon hearing the news that Maria had a brain tumor, I went into rationalization mode and started to stratify in my mind all the different tumors and cancers of the brain and thought, okay, these are bad, these are okay, and this list over here are better than the other ones. And you find yourself in a situation that you know is bad when the best situation you're hoping for is still the best of the worst options. We didn't know Maria's diagnosis yet, and that wouldn't come until about 2 weeks after the surgery. But what we did know is that she had a tumor in the left side of her brain, very near her speech center. And in the past 2 weeks, I'd watched as her symptoms had rapidly progressed. It went from just drooping in the right side of her face. She started to be unable to find words when she was speaking. Every word that she could find came out slurred. And when she was eating, she would often bite her tongue so severely that it would bleed profusely, or she would be choking on her food. And it became clear that in order for Maria and our baby to survive, she needed this treatment right away. I have to say, becoming a patient at UCSF was unlike my experience anywhere else in any other hospital system. I've only been a patient a few times in my life, but I've had years of experience working in medical institutions all throughout this country. And as a patient here at UCSF, every detail was addressed. And the sheer breadth of medical subspecialists available here ensured that the resources we had access to were the sum cumulative knowledge of some of the leading experts anywhere in this country. I'm going to sound a bit like an acolyte of Dan Lowenstein unexpectedly, but some of the things I'm going to speak about, you mentioned very specifically, and I like that our thought processes align. But as a pathologist, I've always appreciated that the word pathology means literally the study of suffering. And I take that to heart. And William Osler said that pathology is the root from which all medicine grows. And in that way, I think that our role in medical specialties, whether you're practicing clinician or you're doing research or you're coordinating those factors, is to reduce the total suffering of humanity. And what better goal is there than that? In humanity's fight against our collective suffering, institutions like UCSF are the tip of the spear. And there aren't many institutions like UCSF. Thanks to the efforts of Dr. Chang and his team, we were quickly scheduled, and we're seeing neurology, OB, maternal fetal medicine, neuropsychology, and neurosurgery. UCSF is a vast and complex medical system, but the experience as a patient didn't feel that way. Every step of the way was fully explained to us. Every caretaker we worked with felt genuine and compassionate. Dr. Gonzalez from OB gave me his personal cell number. I still have it. We'll see if it works. But I had never experienced a healthcare system that felt so personal and so honest as the one here at UCSF. And for the first time since Maria's seizure, I felt like the urgency of her situation was being matched by the healthcare institution we were at. The day prior to Maria's surgery was a Tuesday. And that morning, we had an ultrasound to monitor the health of the baby. At this point, we didn't know whether we were having a boy or a girl. And that was kind of the surprise of pregnancy that we were looking forward to initially. But at this point, we had had enough surprises. We wanted to know one thing for certain. So that morning, we found out we were having another baby girl. And while we processed that information, OB and maternal fetal medicine sat down with us and discussed the risks of the surgery and the pregnancy. And they described how at any moment Maria might need an emergency C-section. So the next day she would be in the middle of a brain surgery, and the possibility existed that at any moment the needs of the baby could start to outweigh the needs to remove Maria's tumor. And in the middle of her brain surgery, she might need to be converted to an emergency C-section. At moments like this, in conversations of that gravity, you can hear what's being said. You might even understand the words that are being said, but being able to process it is just outside of the realm of possibility. And I think even now, as I prepared for this talk, I don't think I fully appreciate the risks that were involved in that surgery. But that's the power of trust. Your doctor says, I'm here for you. And you feel that burden and that fear lift. The next morning, I watched Maria enter into the pre-surgical area, and the only thing I could do now was wait.
Hello, my name is Maria Magner, and I'm 36 years old, and I am 27 weeks pregnant with a baby girl. I'm going to have brain surgery tomorrow. Been 13 days since my seizure, and I can use language pretty well, but it's hard for me to say things and pronouncing. My smile is really sad when I cry because for many reasons. I'm of the best team and support system, and we're going to get through this.
What I thought was going to be an uneventful pregnancy turned out to be the greatest fight of my life. And I had been fighting every second since the seizure, but the morning of the surgery, I felt calm because I knew the greatest chance at my survival and my baby's survival was at UCSF. So I had an awake craniotomy. So Dr. Chang could remove the tumor while also lowering the risk to the functional areas. So throughout the surgery, Dr. JP, a neuropsychologist, would talk to me and ask me to repeat words. And at times, I couldn't repeat them. I could only mumble, which indicated that Dr. Chang was getting too close to my language area. Also, I was told to flex my right hand, wrist, ankle, and foot. And at one point, I felt a spasm in my neck and my face went slack. I couldn't talk. I was having a seizure and I panicked. And Dr. JP said, breathe through it, calm, breathe through it. I was strapped. My head and neck were strapped, so I couldn't move. But I didn't feel any discomfort in my muscles. What I did feel was acid reflux from the pregnancy. And Dr. JP tried to get my mind off it. And he asked, what do you like to do for fun? And I said, thrift shop. And he said, what's the best thing you've ever found thrift shopping? And I said, a mannequin. And then the anesthesiologist laughed, which caused me to laugh. And then Dr. Chang said, stop making her laugh. It's causing her to move. But when it was time for the closure, Dr. Chang advised that I shouldn't be sedated like most because of the pregnancy. So I felt every single staple as they stapled my scalp up. Dr. Chang visited Rory and I in post-op, and he said that he was able to remove most of the tumor, but given the proximity to my language area, he didn't want to remove any more tissue, and that I should be monitored in case of a brain bleed, and that I would experience some swelling over the next few days. So I was taken to OB for monitoring, and it wasn't the only one. This cart came everywhere that I was in the hospital in case I had to have an emergency C-section. They were prepared. So on night 2, I lost feeling in my right hand and my right foot, and I forgot my name. And immediately I was sent to have an MRI. I remember Dr. Chang called Rory to deliver those results. It wasn't brain bleed, thankfully. It was swelling, like he said, but at 1 a.m., he wanted to make sure that we were okay. I cannot stress this enough. Everyone I met at UCSF was compassionate, skilled, confident, and I felt like they really cared about my well-being.
In the weeks following Maria's surgery, we flew back home and started to make preparations for what was ahead of us. We still didn't have the diagnosis, but the radiology and the early microscopic findings suggested that Maria would likely need chemotherapy and radiation, and that this would be about a 2-month process with nearly daily treatment sessions. Maria was now 7 months pregnant, and we were back home with our toddler, and we knew we would need help from our friends and family. We could have them come to us, or we could go to them. Maria was fortunate enough, where she grew up in Northeast Iowa, to be right on the doorstep of another top institution, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And given the circumstances where we knew there was a possibility at any moment she could have an emergency C-section and our situation could be further complicated by an infant, it felt necessary that we call upon everyone we could for their help and support. So we made the decision that the next steps of her therapy would take place in Minnesota, where all of our family were, in Iowa and Minnesota, at the Mayo Clinic. And this whole time, UCSF let us know that they were ready and willing to take Maria through the rest of her treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, and delivery of the baby. Just 2 weeks out from the surgery, we had 2 more visits with UCSF. And the first of which was with Dr. Taylor, where she relayed to us the final diagnosis of Maria's tumor. She had a grade 4 tumor, and this was not the news I wanted. This was at the top of the list of those bad options. And I knew when we received this diagnosis that meant the average survival was 12 to 18 months. And that's with appropriate and timely treatment. And we know already that the pregnancy makes both of those things difficult and risky. The second appointment we had was with Dr. Sneed, radiation oncologist here at UCSF. And she described to us what the next phases of treatment would look like and let us know that UCSF was here for us in every single way that we needed and more. We talked to her about our decision to consider treatment at Mayo Clinic, and she immediately said, I have a colleague in radiation oncology at Mayo Clinic. And before we knew it, we were scheduled and integrated into the Mayo system. And I have to say that in all my experience working in healthcare, the pace with which we were able to enter into that system and receive treatment is in no small part due to the personal referral that came from Dr. Sneed on our behalf. These are images of Maria's brain taken before and after the resection of the tumor. On the left side image, you can see the tumor has that black circle of lines there. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about some things so that we're all on the same page. At one point, up until about 4 years ago, Maria's tumor would have been called a glioblastoma. There's still a tumor that bears that name, but Maria's tumor is now classified as an astrocytoma grade 4. And as I mentioned, the average survival is 12 to 18 months, and that's with surgery and treatment. When I received this, I went back into that rationalization mode, and I read every resource I possibly could on this diagnosis. I wanted to know what was ahead of us and what factors meant the most. And there are many factors that affect outcome. It might be a patient's age, the location of their tumor, what other diseases they might be suffering from. When you look across the breadth of studies, you see common factors. And one of the more significant factors that play in a patient's outcome is the quality of the resection of the tumor, meaning how much of the tumor can the neurosurgeon remove during that surgery. Which leads me to a point where I'm going to try and explain a little bit about neurosurgery, but in the presence of a neurosurgeon. I hope I do it justice. When a neurosurgeon is working up a patient and there's a tumor that needs to be removed, should removal of that tumor take away functions from the patient, such as the patient's ability to walk, use their arms, or even speak, it might be considered too damaging to pursue removal of that tumor. And in such a case, it might be considered inoperable. During the procedure, Dr. Cheng would use an electrode to stimulate different parts of Maria's brain and monitor those functions and try and preserve them while removing the tumor. Hence why he was communicating with Dr. JP to see what functions Maria was exhibiting. And something that stands with me today is what Dr. Cheng told me after the surgery. I knew this about what made something inoperable. And after the surgery, Dr. Cheng said that when he first stimulated Maria's tumor, it caused her speech to arrest. This could mean that the tumor was already in her speech center, and removing it would take away her ability to speak. I think many neurosurgeons may have faced that and decided that this was the end of the road for the surgery. But Dr. Cheng brought with him such a level of expertise and skill and desire to ensure Maria's well-being that he painstakingly worked forward millimeter by millimeter through her tumor, hour after hour for 5 hours, until finally he managed to remove the majority of the tumor, not only saving the life of our child and Maria, but preserving who she is. I believe that there's no other institution that we could have gone to get better care, nor any other neurosurgeon who could have provided better care than Dr. Cheng did for us. This is an opportunity for me to also mention my thanks to Dr. Dan Lowenstein. When I passed our thanks along to Winona Ward, and she relayed that to Dr. Lowenstein, he very humbly said, "It's what we do." And you can receive that information and not think too much about those words, but it really struck me. And it changed who I am. And I realized it is what we do. It's the only purpose of our pursuit. And when I say our, I do mean individuals, UCSF, and humanity. If we're not here for each other, what are we here for? We help each other. It's what we do. That's stuck with me ever since. And it has not only made me a better physician, but I'm a better person for it. Thank you.
We packed our winter clothes and traveled to Rochester, Minnesota on Christmas Day to begin the 6-week treatment plan. I had daily radiation and daily chemotherapy, continuous monitoring of the baby, the weekly ultrasounds monitored my daughter as she grew, so the physicists could ensure the radiation was getting to my tumor and not the baby. But I had so many questions. Will my baby be born healthy? Will the efforts to save my life alter hers? There were no good options, only less destructive ones. And pregnancy is a hope for the future, but I was losing hope. My final dose of radiation was on a Friday, and the C-section was scheduled for Monday. So in the second time in a matter of months, I woke up expecting any outcome, good or bad. Despite my labs showing I was ready for surgery, it became clear that my platelets weren't working due to the chemo. Doctors struggled to contain my bleeding. Doctors worked on me, some on my baby. What was supposed to be less than an hour surgery turned into 3 hours and going. My spinal block wore off in the first hour, so I felt every clamp and suture in my abdomen, which made the craniotomy closure seem like a walk in the park. The anesthesiologist offered to put me under, but I was experiencing so many complications that I thought if I go under, I might not wake up. And I wanted to see my baby. So I saw her. Mm. Mm. And by this time, I had lost over 2 liters of blood, about 30%. So I got a transfusion, and then I was able to see and hold my baby, Winona Cormick. She's cute, isn't she? Yeah, born on Valentine's Day. I continued chemo for another 9 months after she was born. So I couldn't breastfeed. But a group of new moms heard about my story and donated their breast milk to Winona. I still get quarterly MRIs, and we are happy to note that 3 years on, there has been no tumor progression. According to studies with my cancer, only about 5% are still living 3 years. I am standing here, a part of this 5% because of UCSF. So, what would you do with the gift of time? I wanted to learn to write again. So, I volunteer to write legacy stories for hospice patients. Using my journalistic training, I help people facing the end of their lives to preserve their stories. And I'm writing a legacy story for my daughters. I advocate for access to women's health care because my access was a matter of life and death. It's not just me. Rory helps other brain tumor patients understand their diagnosis to turn their fear into empowerment. In many ways, Winona saved my life. Both Winonas. Winona Ward shared my story with Dr. Lowenstein, who shared it with Dr. Chang. And my daughter, Winona, unbeknownst to her, created a situation of such urgency with a demand for incredible expertise that few institutions could provide the level of care and outcome we got here at UCSF. So thank you, all of you.